Good morning, I'm Chris Fox, and welcome to the fourth video in the Outlining Your Novel series. Today we're going to talk about scene structure. So scenes are the basic building blocks of your entire outline, and understanding what needs to go into the creation of each one will really help. This is the part where the light bulb came on in my head and I realized, oh my god, writing is so much easier than I thought it was once I knew what I was going to write. So this is the part where we teach that. So we're going to go into the very first scene in the book. I'm going to show you exactly how I map this scene out, what questions I ask, and the information I need in my head before we start writing it. And then we're going to show you the finished written scene. So in the last video, we highlighted these bits here, and then we used them to form the major points of the story structure. So our inciting incident, our first doorway, the crisis, our second doorway, etc. Now, we're going to take all the rest of this text and use it to create our other chapters, the dots that will connect each of those major points along the story structure. So the very first one, you can see highlighted in gray here. This is the only text before our inciting incident, our meetings chapter. And so I've dropped that text in here, so you can see it down here. This is going to be the core of the scene description. I basically write a paragraph about what the scene is going to contain. And I don't write this out every single time that I'm going to do a scene. This all happens in my head now. But I used to write it down and fill it out, and so that's what I'm going to do here. So you've got your scene goal. What do you need the reader to know about the plot at the end of the scene? What did they learn along the way? What's the important message? Because you got to make sure that's in there. And if the answer is it doesn't contribute to the plot, cut it. There's got to be a reason why it's contributing to the plot, and you answer that here. What emotions am I trying to evoke? So in this case, curiosity and a little bit of dread. And I'll talk about that a little bit more once I've filled out this section. Pick your point of view is number 3. Who has the most to lose? So in this scene, think about your cast of characters and which person has the most to lose based on what happens here, and therefore will exhibit the highest tension. There's your point of view. What is the setting like? What are some good sensory details? So my fiction is known to be very economical in terms of description. I don't write a lot of flowery prose. What I do is find a few important sensory details that will convey the entire scene. So you get a little bit so people know what's going on, and the rest of it is filled in their head. That's my style. So I think of a few of those before going into the scene, and then the last question I ask myself, so I've already kind of completed the scene at this point, I know what I'm writing, then I ask, how can I change that to further raise the tension? You know, can I add another complication or some other bit of data that's learned or some other event that will make the scene even better? And once I have all those fleshed out, I've completed the scene. So I'm going to go ahead and write that now, and the next segment of the video will show you what I've written and why. Okay, so you can see we've got answers now to the questions that I posed before. We'll go over each of them and I'll explain what I wrote and why. So the scene goal. The reader needs to know that Dr. Reed is kidnapping people, that Delta is not to be messed with, and that he's doing this all under duress. We also need the reader to know that Delta is implanted and that all his Marines have cybernetic implants. This establishes them as a threat and garners a little reader sympathy. So you can see what I'm going to have to write here and why I'm going to write it. I know the reason this scene exists, and that's going to inform every piece of data in that scene. Next, I asked myself what emotions I was trying to evoke. Curiosity. I want the reader to wonder who these people are and why are they kidnapping these people off the station. Empathy. I want them to feel empathy for Delta. He's in a tough position. He doesn't want to be doing this, so he's doing bad things because he has no other choice. And then lastly, I want anxiety. The idea of being kidnapped out of your bed in the middle of the night by people for some unknown reason should make you feel anxious. And at the end of the scene, that's kind of where I want them to be. When I picked my point of view, Delta was the clear winner. I could also have done Dr. Reed. So just so we remember, this is Delta. Delta's had his arms hacked off and he works for Reed. He's been implanted. And then we have Dr. Reed himself, who is the terrifying villain. I could have chosen either one of these people, but ultimately I decided Delta would be the clear winner just because the reader will sympathize with him. He also has the most to lose in this particular scene, because if he's discovered, he could lose his life. But if they're successful, he loses another piece of his humanity. You know, he becomes more of a villain, which is terrifying, I'm sure, to somebody who is not in control of their own actions. So then next I asked myself what the setting was like, and I came up with a few good sensory details. You can see them here. I'm not going to read through them. And then lastly, I asked myself, how could I further raise the tension? Delta has lost his name. Reed took it away from him, and even thinking it causes Delta agony. He can't think his old name. So it shows the theft of personality, which should horrify the audience. You know, the idea that this person could take away bits of your mind and you can be shaped and molded into whatever they want is pretty scary. And it will also raise reader sympathy. So there's my basics. This is, you know, sort of what I came up for the scene. And then the actual scene description is very straightforward. Delta and Reed dock in a mining station. Delta and his Marines flood the station with sleeping gas, then gather up bodies to take back to their ship. So it's actually a very short scene. I'll show you the scene here. This is my chapter 1. It's only 800 words long. It's very, very short. And this scene shows exactly what I need it to do and no more. And since an average page in a book, I have air quotes around that, is about 250 words, this scene is only 3 pages. Your audience is in and out. It's a potato chip chapter. It's designed to be very consumable. And you can see that what was actually written, this 800 words, dovetails very nicely with the description. So because I already knew ahead of time what I was going to get in there and write, it was really easy to turn on the movie projector in my head and just create this scene. Okay, so the first chapter's been written. The next stage is fairly straightforward. All we need to do is grab parts of this that have not been used yet and create scenes. So the pair head for a station they believe has just been hit, though no emergency beacon has been activated. That means that I need a chapter where Nolan and Catherine are meeting. And we're going to go ahead and drop that in. I'm going to call that Sparhawk because that's the vessel that Catherine captains. Drop in that scene placeholder. And this is enough for me. So that chapter is basically now done. And you can see that it corresponds to this. This is the final version where the chapter is actually written. But how I got there was just dropping in this piece and doing this for every single chapter in my list. And that's how this whole list gets fleshed out. You can see that I dropped that as the beginning of Act 2. Then I went back to my plot arcs. What's the next one? Okay, so they're getting here early, blah, 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 blah. Okay, so this is them actually being at the mining station. So we're going to call it Mining Station. Add new text. Mining Station. Boom. Drop in that text. Move it over to where it should fall in the plot. And you can see that this became Coronis 127 because I needed to name the mining station. That doesn't happen in this phase, but before I wrote it, I had an idea of what it is. For now, I just know that it's a mining station, and that's enough. So back to the plot arcs. Let's look for the next part. So as they're leaving, we've got kind of a little bit of a reveal here. Boom. So now they're kind of sending their findings to Mendez. There we go. So report. So they finish up at the mining station and they send their information to Mendez. And I think that's probably enough for you to get the sense of how this works. So just a final quick comparison. If you look at Act 1, I have my 3 chapters here. Their names aren't final, they aren't written, and that was transformed into this. So you've got each one having a chapter name that fits the plot, but the structure was determined here. And the same thing is happening in Act 2, where I'm dropping in scenes and just going through this list here. And I'll go through each of the arcs and make sure every bit of this is represented somewhere in one of these scenes. And we'll do the same thing for Act 3, which is fairly short. And so when I was done, I had this number of chapters. They were laid out like this. They had these names. But then I would go through and I'd write each chapter. And it's really as simple as that. That's all you need to put together as a basic outline. And as you write through these chapters, don't be afraid to make changes. If you get, 3 chapters in and you see another chapter that needs to be dropped somewhere, do that. You could put a placeholder. Maybe you decide that you need, shot, a chapter where Nolan gets shot. You just drop it in, and then later, you flesh that out and you make sure that it fits in your plot. So this should sort of grow and evolve organically. If you want a really good look at how I implemented that, you can see what I did for Destroyer. So I went through my entire editing. So you saw kind of my skeletal structure of what I had put together for the outline, and then people got to watch it evolve. So check out the challenge videos if you have any curiosity about that. Eventually I'll do a series on editing, but for now that's where you're going to find the best editing information. Hopefully this series has been useful for you. This is kind of the official ending, but there's going to be one more video next week. I'm going to use Aeon Timeline, so here's your little preview, Aeon Timeline to create a timeline for the next book. And I'll show you how you can utilize this software to really track your whole project. It's super, super useful. It gives you a very visual, intuitive representation of your outline. So anyway, we'll do that next week. For now, I think you've got enough data to do your novel start to finish, and that was my goal for this series. So thank you very much for tagging along. Please consider subscribing to the channel or the mailing list.